Hi everyone, this is Khalid for Threads, and today I want to talk about what is happening with Iran. So on June 12, Israel launched strikes on Iran. This was different from the previous strikes on Iran in that previously it seemed to be theatrical, some people were skeptical of what was happening, and the responses were very limited. But this time it's clear that Israel had gone all out, killing the head of the IRGC, killing top nuclear scientists for the Iranian government, and killing many civilians, including men, women, and children. It was sudden and it has been continued launching of strikes from Iran to Israel as a response to Israel's assault on Iran. So I want to talk about this because there are multiple things to note. And first, I want to take us back. I want to take us back to Syria. On December 8th, Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria at the time, for decades, fell and he escaped to Russia. I believe strongly that Iran and Russia, which had been really supporting the Syrian government in holding its power in the country after starting in 2011, there was a quote unquote civil war, there was an uprising against the Syrian government, and there was major foreign intervention, foreign Western Gulf support for the falling of the Syrian government, which up until then continued to reject normalization with the Zionist entity and was not aligned with the US as most of the Arab countries were at the moment. So I believe that the West, the Gulf, wanted the Syrian government to be overthrown. And that is exactly what they did. NATO operations were taking part in the country, claiming they were there to fight ISIS. But under their bombardments, ISIS continued to expand and grow. Saudi Arabia released prisoners to go and fight the Syrian regime. And these terrorist groups, such as ISIS, which only targeted Muslim infrastructure and infrastructure of countries and groups that were opponents of Israel and the Zionist entity. For example, they targeted Syria, they targeted Iraq, they tried to enter Lebanon and to fight Hezbollah. But never did ISIS, for example, enter Jordan right across the border. Jordan is not stronger than Syria. It is not stronger than Iraq. But ISIS never tried to enter Jordan, which you could argue is less religious than many of the parts that they were attacking, if that was truly their intent. Why did ISIS not attack the one non-Muslim state at the border, which is Israel, but it was attacking Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon? Anyways, so that's what was happening in Syria. And so eventually the Iranian government comes in, the Russian government comes in, and they turn the table. ISIS begins to diminish. Eventually, it's a big victory for Iran, Russia, Hezbollah, as the West basically loses. Much of them withdraw, and much of the parties that were trying to overthrow Bashar al-Assad end up accepting defeat, and they start to re-normalize with him. But then, the next steps that come in Syria, as Bashar al-Assad had regained much of the territories that were lost, stability, being invited back to the Arab League, suddenly out of nowhere, Russia pulls out of Syria. Iran pulls out of Syria. Imagine spending billions of dollars and so many troops lost. Why would Russia and Iran suddenly pull out of Syria? Both countries claimed that this rebel advance by HTS, led by someone that the US had a $10 million bounty over his head, that the Syrian government was not willing to fight. The Iranian government said, we can't fight for someone that's not willing to fight if the Syrian army isn't willing to fight. But you cannot tell me after over a decade, 13 years of the Syrian military fighting, that after they regained all this land, suddenly the Syrian military decided that their troops don't want to fight. And this goes counter to the claims made by Syrian soldiers themselves, who came out saying, we want to fight, but the orders were made for us to not fight. So at the time, also in the final weeks of Bashar al-Assad in December, we heard that Russia was meeting with Iran and Turkey on the sidelines, that certain deals were being made. And ultimately, Russia pulled out its diplomatic staff. Same with Iran, started to pull out diplomatic staff and troops while Bashar al-Assad was still president and in Damascus. So it seemed that there was an abandoning of Syria, of the Syrian government, by Iran and Russia, but that's because deals were made. And I believe strongly that the deal that was made by Russia, and of course we're going to see this increasingly as time moves on, was that the US would get out of Ukraine, and that's still going to come, and we're going to see. I mean, Ukraine is still striking pretty heavily Russia, but we're going to see how that turns out. And Iran, I believe, which has been under heavy pressure internally because of the sanctions, that they would get some sanctions relief by the Trump administration, the same administration that ended the nuclear deal, brought back the heaviest sanctions on Iran and pressure. And so, I don't know, maybe the West, the US government, lied to the Iranians about this deal or to the Russians as well. But this is what was accepted. And immediately we saw, so after Iran pulled out, Russia pulled out, Bashar al-Assad left. I mean, I'm sure Bashar could have stayed and tried to fight the entire West. If basically Russia, Iran told him, like, this deal was done, we're not going to be supporting you. You can stay if you want and try to fight with your army. You'll probably lose because we're the ones that really helped solidify you and defend you. Or you can go live in peace and just end this fight and, let HTS and the West and Israel really take over Syria. So that's what happened. Russia actually didn't move its equipment from Syria to Ukraine or Russia. It sent all its equipment to Libya, to its bases there. So it's not like Russia needed that equipment for its ongoing invasion of Ukraine. And so that's what happened. Then things started to calm with Iran. Trump came to power. I mean, there'd still be some threats and stuff, but Trump was talking about how he's very optimistic of a nuclear deal. In fact, this Sunday, so this weekend, for the 6th round of talks, Iran was supposed to meet with the American administration in Oman, which was mediating the talks for this nuclear deal that the Iranians and the Americans were reportedly very close to achieving. And so Israel, which for years has been saying it refuses this nuclear agreement between Iran and the US, has been threatening to launch strikes on Iran. So why did Israel this week decide, a few days before the Americans and the Iranians potentially reach a nuclear agreement in Oman? Israel in the end is very much a war state. When it's in trouble, when it wants distractions, it launches another war. It strikes another country. It instigates another fight. But I think here, Israel has really been pushing for the US to launch attacks on Iran. It's desperate for it, and I think in this case, Israel is trying to not only end this nuclear deal, but to suck the US into a war with Iran that it really has not been wanting to do. Also to frame itself as a victim. And going back to the situation, unfortunately, I think Iran really hoped and tried to have trust, perhaps out of desperation, that it can get this nuclear deal, get things to become more peaceful, relieve the pressure on the government. I don't believe, the reports that Hezbollah is so destroyed. I believe, of course, they've been heavily attacked and their structure there's major reorganization going on as much of the leadership has been killed. But I believe much of the weapons that Hezbollah has, the capabilities that have been reported over many years, haven't been used against Israel in the last war. And I don't believe Hezbollah would have just left these weapons, powerful weapons. Hezbollah was seen to be its power equivalent to that of a middle NATO force. Even I've read a report once by a US military expert that Hezbollah has the power to invade Saudi Arabia. So I don't imagine that Israel can just like that destroy Hezbollah in its entirety. And its arsenal of, the reports were at the time 150,000 rockets. It's simply not possible that such rockets stored in such deep bunkers and this group just disappears like that without even a possible ground invasion. I mean, Hezbollah, when Israel tried to invade from the south of Lebanon, fully repelled and didn't allow Israel to enter anything in Lebanon. So I do believe Hezbollah is very strong still and present, but there is an agreement made that for them to quiet down as they restructure and perhaps receive support also in that restructuring from Iran, and to regather and re-strengthen themselves. And in that time, yeah, I believe Iran was hoping to be able to get sanctions relief by the calming of its allies and the calming of the region. But now I believe that we're going to see a resurgence of Hezbollah as Israel continues this, of the Houthis. And the US, so far, we are seeing it. We're seeing Trump coming out saying, yeah, we knew Israel was going to do this. We fully support. And rather than the Canadians, the French, which have condemned Russia for invading Ukraine, condemned other countries for their aggressions on sovereign states, we thought maybe they'd come out and condemn Israel for its attacks on Iran. But what they did instead was they were silent when Israel invaded Iran. They waited and waited and waited until Iran retaliated for them to release statements condemning Iran and saying, we support Israel's right to defend itself, which is just peak hypocrisy of these Western settler colonial regimes. Canada, for in this case, with Mark Carney, who many people had hope and faith that this person would be different. But why would he be different? He's a settler colonial leader. And if you look at his Twitter statement, it was the exact same as the one by Emmanuel Macron. And here is just to say that every single G7 leader is the same, and they are working with US Zionist approval. And you can't tell me otherwise, and that they would change. And also, what's happening with Iran just reflects how pathetic and weak the Zionist state is. Iran is a self-sustaining military power that has, despite sanctions, built its own missile defense systems, built its own submarines, built its own military prowess, its missiles. Whereas Israel, it's getting these F-35s using to strike Iran from the United States. The missiles that Iran is using to defend itself and retaliate for Israel's aggression, which Israel used US weapons for, Iran is using its own weapons, and the US is there to defend and start to intercept the missiles from Iran. It is really the US fighting this war for Israel. Israel is a tiny little population, a little tiny piece there in the Middle East, that wouldn't be able to do what it does without the military support of the US superpower, which is crumbling, whose own population is so homeless, reduced life expectancy, terrible food regulations, crumbling bridges. Every few months we hear of another bridge that falls into the sea with the cars on it. And in that process, they are supporting a sustained effort, aggression against a country, Iran, of over 80 million people, that is, despite all of these efforts, able to withstand and support itself. And Iran is going to continue to support itself. And the only thing that Israel has done with this aggression and trying to drag the US into a war with Iran, it's going to get Iran to soon have official nuclear bombs. Because what is the purpose of a country pursuing a nuclear bomb? It's for defense. A country that feels really threatened uses nuclear weapons to deter other countries from attacking it. Would Israel have done what it did to Iran now if Iran had nuclear weapons? I do not believe so. Do I support nuclear proliferation? No, it makes the world less safe. But you know what? Israel is the only country in the Middle East to have nuclear bombs. Yeah, Israel's the one going out there constantly saying no one else gets to have a nuclear bomb. Why is that? Is that fair? Well, why doesn't the world talk about how Israel needs to disarm from its nuclear weapons? Everyone knows Israel has nuclear weapons. Yeah, we need to think about that more and the hypocrisy of the West. And you know what? Iran has the right to defend itself. Israel here is the clear aggressor. Israel launched this attack despite the world knowing that Israel is planning on launching this attack. Israel telling everyone we are going to launch this attack and threatening it for years. And Iran is defending itself. Israel has no right whatsoever in anything that is happening here. But in terms of a geopolitical analysis here, if the US clearly starts taking a stronger approach in supporting Israel in its assault on Iran, not just defending, I could see Iran launching strikes on US targets in Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, in the United Arab Emirates, and we could see things proceed from there. I'm seeing Jordan also itself intercepting missiles coming from Iran towards Israel. Jordan says this is because it is protecting its airspace from potential projectiles that can land and affect Jordan. But is Jordan intercepting missiles, jets that are flying over Jordan to go and attack Iran? No, not a single one has been targeted. Why not go and defend the ones coming from the Zionist entity? The reason is that Jordan is the biggest defender of the Zionist entity and that Israel would not exist without the existence of Jordan, which is basically a large Palestinian refugee camp preventing Palestinians from returning home. And that's been its purpose since 1948. And that's the reason of its massive donation. I mean, Jordan, like Israel, is another welfare state that just gets money from the West to prevent Palestinians from returning to their homes and to suppress Palestinian refugees. That is the reality. So in the end, we're going to keep monitoring what's happening to Iran. I want to keep it there. But honestly, what is happening is remarkable because Israel has, with arrogance, thought that it can attack Iran, get away with it. The West, continues to be exposed for its hypocrisy, as do these G7 countries, but they are being exposed, and Iran on its own is able to take on these countries. Israel finally took on someone its own size. Iran is not Hamas. Iran is not Hezbollah. They were launching missiles at Israel from submarines in the sea. Not many countries have the ability to do that. And Iran is not a country that needs the codes and the military supplies from other countries. People might say Egypt has such a powerful military, Saudi Arabia, which spent the third most on military defense for so many years, ahead of even Russia, but their military would never compare to Iran, which is self-sustaining of its military power, doesn't build any of its military for itself. And its military, even if it was to try to use its advanced equipment, would not come close to the power of the Iranian military. This is the truth in terms of a military analysis standpoint. And Iran has built its military to its strength. It might not have the advanced air superiority of the Israeli military, but they've built it and planned for what is happening. There may be some misplanning here and there, but they will adjust, readapt. The way Iran's military works is essentially like a big guerrilla military. And they work very asymmetrically. The way their navy works is rather than having a big destroyer and advanced massive ships, they'll have a lot of speedboats that they've readjusted to have missiles, and they swarm big ships, and they operate in unique ways that no other military in the world honestly operates by. And they've really managed and found a way to be strong despite the decades of sanctions against them. And also, what's happening is going to rally Iranians, including those that were against the regime, with the Iranian government. And this is only strengthening the resolve of Iranians. And so, on this note, we're going to keep watching what's happening, but we continue to get closer. As time goes on, Israel gets more arrogant. The war criminals running the Zionist regime, continue to get more and more arrogant, and this is causing them to take action that accelerate the destruction of the settler colonial Zionist regime. And the Western countries that continue to support it continue to dig themselves deeper and deeper in their hole of hypocrisy, and they are further getting exposed. And Mark Carney is literally no different than Trudeau. He might look a little more polished and formal, political, like economist-like, with his fancy degrees, but he is no different whatsoever than Justin Trudeau. He's just reading the Liberal Party script that they read, that is the same as Macron's script and whatever the US and Israel give them. So that is that. To the Muslim organizations that invite Mark Carney for Eid to make speeches and to get the Muslim support and vote, shame on you. You are complicit in this. You are also hypocrites. And Allah talks about in the Quran, there's a whole chapter on munafiqun, the hypocrites, and how you are going to be in the lowest depths of hell, بالدرك الأسفل. And so if you think that you represent anything about Islam, Islam is a religion of justice, and you have completely strayed from the messages of Allah and of Islam. That is that. This is Khalid for Pali Threads. Free Palestine. Long live the resistance. Salam.